Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, I want to talk about researching and understanding satanic cults. Now, this has been going on for some time. There seems to be a rebirth in interest in this and the apparently huge interest into what's called real crime. Apparently there's something that really turns on women. Very bizarre. And people are interested in this. There's a huge following of it, basically affluent, middle class, upper middle class women in particular, who are fascinated by serial killers, and they go on tours of Jeffrey Dahmer. Of course, we know that every serial killer has a long list of female fans. If you can't get a date, go out and murder a few people, and you'll have a whole bunch of people writing you. How strange. But true. But one of the problems with satanic cults is that they are not occultism. You know, I've studied this for many years, and I don't consider myself an occultist. I'm an occult scientist, manifesting scientist. Subtle energy physics is really what I'm into now. But, you know, this covers any subtle energies. And when you try and manifest something from just energy informational fields, which is what ancient alchemicalists and magicians did. Well, they were using nothing. They were taking energetic fields and bringing them into the physical world to make something happen. But I always was an occult scientist, and one of the problems is people don't understand Satanism, which is not part of occultism or occult sciences. It's reverse Christianity. Now, the bottom line is that every satanic practice is generally started with the Hellfire Club and the Black Mass that they were doing was taking Christian masses and Christian belief systems and reversing them. So you would do a Christian mass backwards, and this was considered satanic. Now, few people understand that. It wasn't, if you research, quote, witchcraft, paganism, occultism, magic, thinking you're going to understand Satanism, well, you're totally off track. And that's what a lot of these people did. The famous Moray, I guess is how you pronounce his name, Terry, who wrote The Ultimate Evil, was trying to figure out Satanism by reading books on witchcraft. Well, it has absolutely nothing to do with that. This continues to this day of trying to tie in occultism or magical practices, witchcraft, with Satanism. It's nothing at all the same. Now, a lot of Satanists steal from everything because they have no original system. So they go back and find other systems to copy to kind of influence them. Well, a giant mistake recently made by one of these Son of Sam researchers was looking at the graffiti of the so-called Son of Sam cult in a park on a wall there. And what they had which is very typical, and here's what we're talking about, doing things backwards. Now, the bottom line is they use a cross, but they use it upside down. So that's a backward symbol. So, and this is what they do. They take the pentagram and they put it backwards or reverse it. Very important to understand that, and this skips most people's understanding because they have a very shallow view of what's going on. So if you're going to look to witchcraft and try and somehow think that it can correlate with Satanists who are doing backwards Christian masses and so forth, well, you're missing the boat. You're not going to find anything. Now, as I mentioned, Satanists will take some occult practices and try and use them as their own. Now, when you get into paganism and other things, and you get back into ancient belief systems, which were agricultural-based societies, there was a certain amount of animal sacrifice, as there is in Santeria and Voodoo today. But most of the time, this included of using the animals to feed the people, and this is one way of the practitioners and the priests to get in good with the community, is that they would have food to eat after you come to the Mass and you get food. So, kind of like the breakfast after the Mass in Catholic churches, go to the pancake breakfast. So, all of this was part of the reality of that, and we need to understand that. So, when you look at someone, Maury Terry, who was investigating Satanism, was getting a bunch of books on witchcraft. It has absolutely nothing to do with that, and they were common books. They try and tie in Aleister Crowley, who claimed that he was the evilest man in the world. He never stated he was a Satanist. What he was into was evil magic. So there's a difference. Now, so I would consider him, quote, Satanists are into evil magic. So they kind of get lumped in because of what they're doing. And of course, there's talks of sacrifice and so forth of animals and people. This cross is in there, but a lot of this stuff is really based in Satanism, and sacrifices of animals and people have been going on. It's all part of this. We can't really separate that from what we call common traditional practices of today. If you go to the Baptist church, you drink grape juice, you're drinking the blood of Jesus. The Catholic masses are the worst because you actually eat the flesh of Jesus. That's what the Eucharist is. You eat the flesh, drink the blood. This is pretty horrible. Now, nobody looks at that as, how symbolic. Yeah, well, let's have it start a whole new church, and we're going to base it on symbolic blood drinking and cannibalism. Sound like a good idea to you? And we'll put a cross on the building. So this is one of the problems out there. So we have to be very careful. Now, Satanism is a particular type of belief system that follows very unusual practices, which are the worst and debased of all. So, and they're doing everything negative that they can do, and it's backwards. So Satanism, as a general understanding, if you wanted to put a definition in a dictionary, you would say it's reverse Christianity. While Christians believe in Jesus and God, Satanists believe in Satan and Lucifer. So these are entities that come out of the Judeo-Christian Bible belief system. There is a philosophy, and of course, Zoroastrianism, which has this black and white understanding of things, ties in. And again, we're coming from all the crotch religions of the world that come out of the Middle East. So this polarity of good and bad, we have to understand that Satanists are just that. They're just that to go with all this ridiculousness that goes on. So we need to understand this and look at these things exactly for what they are. And what they are a serious problem of reverse Christianity. So most people and most Satanists have absolutely no idea of what paganism or alternative religions are. If you're going to go into the most popular, which was Wicca, there's Gardnerian Wicca. I think it was, Saunders or Sinclair? There's two types of Wicca. But of course, Wicca was, again, an invented pagan religion started by a Brit. Gerald Gardner, who was spent most of his time apparently in Hong Kong as a customs agent, came back and then started this. And he started what was pretty much a kind of a earth-based, fairly kinky witchcraft practices. There's a lot of nudity, a lot of sexual, the grand rite where everybody had sex. There was a lot of sex in there, which was part of a lot of paganism as well. But this had nothing to do with the devil or anything else. There's the Hellfire Club. Now, the Hellfire Club, which Benjamin Franklin and many people were members of, was kind of a swingers club using Satanism. So they would do the Black Mass. And this involved doing everything backwards and also involving sex and other things. So it's a very particular, unusual area. You don't find any Satanist figures in most paganism. You don't find figures like that. The gods themselves are very unpredictable, can have a dark side and a light side. There are certain trickster gods in Norse mythology. There's Loki, who could be considered a Satan figure who betrayed the gods and so forth. But it's not a classical satanic figure. Most mythology is kind of practical. Well, you're going to have somebody that's in your group that's a traitor. That's called Loki. And you would call that evil. So these are the type of things that go on in these systems. So if you're looking for that, you're not going to find it. So they're trying to correlate satanic practices with things like Wicca and witchcraft and so forth. Now, the OTO, the Crowleyite groups, in a lot of ways, were very conventional and almost boring. And what they did in terms of most of the practices were kind of odd. Now, what he did to add in, of course, everything that Crowley ever got involved in, he did, and he put his own spin on it. He was a homosexual. He wanted homosexual practices. He made sure that he got everybody involved in that. He added his own belief systems. So all of this he put in there, and this is what a lot of things come down to, is that these higher stages. He took over the OTO, a German group, and put in all his sex magic as part of the initiations, with the highest level of it being homosexual sex magic practices, which, of course, that's what he was into. So if you started a group like that, it's illegal in most of Europe at that time. Now, homosexuality has only been, quote, legal in Europe since about 1968, 1969. Now, in 1969, Britain legalized homosexuality. Before, there was a crime, and people got arrested and thrown in prison. And in 1968, Germany legalized it. So the whole idea, it's the only time it's been legal. After that, you could be persecuted and thrown in prison for that, which is why Crowley and so many other people didn't come out as homosexuals, because it's against the law. Quite interesting there. And while there seems to be no criminals out there, there seems to be plenty of actual problems with wasting time on these kind of incidents. So the whole idea is that this is the kind of thing that happens in people. So how do you research this? Well, it gets to be very gray. If you want to look at negative occultists, and these are not occult scientists. Remember, occult science is the highest level of occultism, where you're trying to find methods and techniques that can manifest for you from ancient literature and practices. So this is not Satanism in any way. There's really nothing to learn from Satanism whatsoever. It's very base level. It's very kindergarten. There's nothing there. Do disgusting, perverse things, do rituals backwards, and of course you're going to get empowered with that. Kill somebody, something, and you're getting empowered from that. So all of that stuff is really kind of kindergarten nonsense. Of course it doesn't work, but it does create a black-mailed and warped mind group of people who then are willing to do anything. Once you start doing one debased practice after another, it's like everything in life. You do it once, the second time becomes easier, the third time is easier, the fourth time is just common practice. So it's quite different than any kind. So you're not going to, unless you're reading books about Satanism specifically, and you're researching satanic practices, to try and go in and read a book on Wicca or try and take Aleister Crowley's stuff and figure out what Satanism is, you're totally off track. It's apples and oranges. So we really need to understand that. I mean, Crowley really didn't have anything new. He stole everything from the Golden Dawn, which he was in for 1 year, and then they threw him out because he was kind of a scumbucket. He then revealed all their secrets in books that were then rewritten by his male lover assistants. So all of that was then taken from there. He never had anything because he was a rich guy and people thought that he would invest in groups and bring money to them. He was able to worm his way into a lot of apparently mentally unstable rich women and other groups that were struggling at that time, like the OTO that was based in Germany, which was a totally fantasy nonsense group that was based in just the fantasy of those people. But he took it over and people thought he would bring in money and other things. He did nothing. So, there's nothing impressive about anything that Aleister Crowley ever did. As a magician, since he is so well known and tracked, we know that he failed at everything he ever did. I don't think we have more than one instance of any ritual he ever did that worked. And we have his life laid out here, and we know that he went to court many times, and I think he only won one court case. All the other court cases he went to, which were 5 or 6, whatever the actual count is, he lost. He had money from beer sales that Graham, I think it was Daddy, ran a beer organization, and he was a born-again Christian. He was a radical Christian who made his money from beer. How weird is that? He went through the typical British school system, private school system, boarding schools, where it was nothing but buggery throughout the entire system, which is typical. So whatever sexuality he had, he went through these horrible bisexual experiences that is very typical in private school systems in England. So from there, of course, and I'm not sure if that was just his taste anyway, that was his situation. But it's not Satanism. So you got to understand that's not Satanism. So Satanism really opens up for you to do anything because you're going against society. So everything is open if you go against society. So the bottom line is that the talk of human sacrifices and the talk of using babies and everything else is the highest level of perverse activities, including all sorts of torture and molestation. This is what's in. Now, this is not part of Aleister Crowley's belief systems, nor did he ever preach that, even though people like to throw that stuff in to be scary. Oh, the greatest sacrifice is a baby. Well, you know, this is a lot of pulp fiction talk. And you may find some of this in ancient literature, but you got to remember that most of that ancient literature, grimoires in particular, like the Red Dragon, etc., are basically Judeo-Christian texts. They talk about Lucifer and Satan, and they're all based in the Judeo-Christian belief system, and these are the fallen or negative angels that you're supposed to control for proper purposes, meaning you don't go to St. Michael, the great protector and destroyer of evil, and ask him, hey, can I go to a piece of towel on Friday? I need money. Well, you don't do that, so you're going to talk to kind of the scummy guy on the corner who can get you that deal on something. We need to understand that. So that's what you've done. But you did it in the name of God and Jesus, and those were your protectors. So basically, you would use an ancient grimoire, particularly the Red Dragon, the Grand Grimoire. You would use Lucifer, Satan, some fallen angels, and say, look, if you don't do what I want because I need money, I'm going to send the good guys after you, and they're going to kick your butt like they did originally. So to kind of sum it up in common terms, that's what those are. And they're classic texts. I mean, they're fascinating to read, and there is a certain energy there. So if you want to do that without worship or sacrifice, the minute you start sacrificing and worshiping, you've tied yourself to that entity, and they're going to use you and abuse you. This is part of Satanism, but it's still part of the Judeo-Christian. So it was interesting to see the books that he read, and none of them really were, and particularly at the time of his research in the 70s, I'm not sure there was many books on that. You couldn't really find out. You know, the Satanic Bible's been selling by the millions for many years. I read the book and was not really found it to be all that objectionable. I mean, most people believe in that kind of Machiavellian talk. Well, if someone hurts you, you hurt them back. Eye for an eye type of thing. I didn't find it overly surprising. You know, they like to put in these little tidbits that are shocking, but the book really wasn't that. It was more about, well, you know, we are base animalistic creatures and we need to understand that we're sexual, we want money and other things. Well, I'm not sure there's that much wrong with that, but the bottom line is that we are kind of primitive creatures. Should we, because we're a society based in greed and sex, should we get more into that? Well, I don't think so. I don't think that being part of the crowd or getting to your basic emotions is some sort of great thing to have. You should strive to be a higher, better person where that isn't as critical in your life. But we do have to understand that that is part of our lives. When you create a religion that tells your priests they have to be celibate against the basic law of nature, well, you're setting up a giant house of cards that goes from bad to worse, which has happened particularly in the Catholic Church, which is one of the worst offenders there are. And do they do anything to take care of these offenders? No, they cover up for them. They found nunneries where they found in their backyards where they found hundreds of fetuses that the nuns who were raped by the priests had the fetuses and, of course, killed them and buried them. How horrible that is. But that's what that system set up. You can't take a person of primitive sexuality and tell them, believe in this guy and you're okay. Well, I don't see how belief in anything gets you through any problems in life. Belief in anything doesn't put food in your mouth, doesn't put a roof over your head, and doesn't, of course, meet your basic needs, whether sexual or anything else. So we need to understand that. So this is what we're set up for. But, we're in hell here, baby. Understand that you're living in prison camp Earth with all the scum buckets. So to research these things, you have to understand what their practices are. As I said, recently I saw a documentary on the son of Sam who was showing different graffiti and so forth. And of course, he even had a, quote, occult expert. Well, you've got real problems there with your research because they had graffiti there where they had upside down crosses. Well, that's obviously satanic. It's such a classic thing. So, black crosses upside down. Again, reverse. You've got to understand that, so you have to look for reverse things. But what was interesting there is they had an actual white circle around these crosses, and this was a big thing, so it was a big area, and connected to that white circle was a cross, a regular cross. So it was a white circle, and connected to that was a cross. Well, what that is doing is that there is obviously a positive cult who went in there, because that's an anti. What they're doing is taking this satanic energy and enclosing it so it doesn't escape. Now, the researcher who did this didn't get it. I left a little comment on him, and this is Manny Grossman, who I really no longer support because I've reached out to him, and he has an occultist on there that is a young, ignorant guy. So the whole idea is that doesn't know what he's talking about, doesn't understand the bigger picture, and certainly hasn't researched it for 40 years like I did. But, hey, baby, I'm going to put out the real information, and you're the loser for it. So they didn't notice that. They thought that white thing was part of it. You don't use crosses in a normal manner if you're a Satanist, and you generally don't use white. So to further clarify that, people have to understand what a circle means. It means holding in the energy. Now, one of the classic symbols that uses a circle was the peace sign. Very few people understand what the peace sign was. Now, the peace sign is the runic protection symbol, upside down, meaning opposite, meaning death, with a circle around it, meaning they're stopping death. The peace symbol means stop death because they put a circle on it. If you just use the upside down, it meant death. So what they were doing with the peace symbol, peace means life. So this is very typical of what symbols mean. So anytime you use a circle and then you connect something to it, like they did, a white cross, they were fighting the negative. Now, if you're not smart enough to do that, well, what's the problem? The idea is you're getting bad information from people because of their bad research. So only an expert would understand that, and there isn't too many people out there. So they think all the graffiti on that wall was from that. And apparently there was operating in that particular Untermeyer Park area. Apparently there were positive people there. And there may have been a whole group of positive occultists. I don't think they were called scientists. Some of them called themselves druids and other things. We just don't know. There is a dark aspect of druidism which had to do with hanging and headhunting. But somebody used a positive symbol to counter the negative symbol. We don't know. But you're not going to get that from this guy because he don't know what he's talking about, as all the other groups. The same thing with Maury Terry, who's reading Wicca books trying to figure out what Satanism is. That's like reading a cookbook for Mexican food and trying to figure out what French food is all about. So it just doesn't work that way. So you get this bad information. He's also hanging around with a very bizarre and very misguided person who he is working with as well, who's giving a lot of bad information. So there's all sorts of things going on out there. But if you're going to research, you have to research what Satanism is. And I don't know if there's a particular book on that or not in general. But the bottom line is that Satanism is not too difficult to figure out. You're going to use reverse Christian symbols. You're going to use a pentagram, which is basically, some people think it's even a Christian symbol, and it may go back to that. The actual pentagram signifies the 5 wounds of Christ. It also signifies, I believe, is it Venus? And you find pentagrams in many churches. Apparently, a lot of Knights Templar churches in Portugal use the pentagram in the correct position, pointing up constantly. So the pentagram in general, again, you got to remember they're using the pentagram reversed. So this means you're reversing the positive energy to negative. So if you don't get that, you don't get anything that goes with that. So this is the kind of thing that we have to look at in understanding Satanism and what they're involved in. Now, there's been offshoots. This is the typical level. You don't see any kind of, you have Satanism, which has kind of stayed low level. The Temple of Set, or the Satan of Egyptian mythology, Set, who murdered his brother, and so forth. And always was thought to be this evil god of heat and disease. Well, they have their own little traditions in the Temple of Set, but I don't see much reference to this. You don't see that many Setian images or talk about Set. It's all about Satan. So you don't hear that from the most popular. I don't see anything from Conetting or anybody else talking about Set very much, but there may be. He talks about different negative entities depending on what suits him, so he can write a new book to make more money off of it. So he's done this even with Norse stuff. He's got some buddy who's a Norse, whatever, and so forth. So he goes into those things, but you don't really, I'm not sure there is a sign of Set that anybody would really know. So they're going to use the reverse pentagram, meaning that you're taking positive earth energies and reversing them into darkness. You're going to take a cross, which means Christianity. Another thing is take an upside down cross and kind of put a question mark, or you hook the top of the cross. So it's a question mark, meaning we don't believe in Jesus or the crucifixion. So this is what you're running into. But any way you look at it, this is reverse Jesusism, reverse Christianity. It's not in any way dealing with what would be considered general, and it's a terrible term. It's like psychic now, occultism. It's not dealing with magic, Wicca, even Aleister Crowley and stuff like that. These are not, if you're looking for satanic information in Wicca, you're in the wrong path. This is an earth religion that celebrates earth gods, the green god, the planet, working with these kind of energies. There's absolutely nothing there that is, that is negative. You can certainly spin stuff negative, and they try and pervert things and so forth. And of course, this is depending on the individual. But we have to be very careful there. As he said, the Baptist Church, they give you grape juice, and that's drinking the blood of Christ. Well, how freaky is that? You go to the Catholic Mass and you're eating his body. Wow. So the point is, if I started a religion like that and I said, we're gonna drink blood and eat someone's body, but it's a good dude, well, who would follow that? But that's exactly what these masses do. So you can see how easy it is to start perverting that stuff. Now, the animal sacrifices, of course, have been going on, and the truth has to be, the Jews today sacrifice animals, and it is part of the Jewish religion. Animal sacrifice is common. You had to sacrifice hundreds of animals a day to keep the Ark of the Covenant empowered. And this is a fact written in the documents about that. A lot of conservative Jews will actually cut the throats of chickens to release the energy for your personal sins. So, this goes back to all of these traditions. And all these traditions, of course, you got to remember that Jesus was a rabbi. He was training to be a Jewish rabbi. So these things have filtered into Christianity. Christianity has tried to be less bloodthirsty, but if you go back to ancient Christianity, there it goes into the use of all this kind of nonsense. So the bottom line is that this is part of these religions. So to think that Christianity is a bloodless religion, as I've mentioned recently, they have found in Christian texts out of Egypt that they were actually practicing human sacrifice. After all, their deity, Jesus, was a human sacrifice on a cross. So, these things get to be very... Now, common, quote, modern Christians and the many Christian sects, Seventh-day Adventists, the Methodists, the Lutherans, all these things, they didn't get it right the first time, so they split off into hundreds of groups, the Mormons, etc. So you get into all these kind of very strange belief systems. I mean, the Mormons wear special underwear with sigils on them because this protects them. Gee, that sounds like occult science to me. So all these things that they do, yet they're haters of the occult science. And anything that has to do with the occult sciences, the Mormon church freaks out about. Yet they're one of the most mythical or mystical Christianity that there is. So all of this is part of this reality that is very confusing. Now, Satanism, when you study it, you have to study it in that fashion. If you don't understand the backwards, upside down cross, the symbols they use, the question mark, I mean, this is classic. And when you look at things, you have to say, well, what is involved with this? What are they saying here? I mean, obviously an upside down cross and an upside down pentagram, which again, they love. They don't have any imagination. You must remember that all evil people have no new ideas. They steal everything. And I've seen this with businesses and everything. You show me businesses, even countries and attitudes, they have no new ideas. It's all stolen from someone else, and they may improve upon it. So Satanists are that. The satanic symbols have always been stolen. Anton LaVey stole those symbols of a Baphomet, which is basically a Baphomet is a positive symbol showing the natural forces of life. People have tried to make that into an evil symbol, but you should look at the actual, I have an entire video on that, which explains the Baphomet, which is kind of an interesting symbol of positive, earth-based, primitive, but positive energies, the good, the bad, the yin and yang, and it uses a positive Venus pentagram on its head. It is not upside down. Now, again, what happens here, just like the swastika was stolen, the Baphomet was stolen, so many things are stolen and used by these unimaginative, evil people, and we need to understand that. And you need to understand that as a person researching this. And what symbols they use. And they're going to steal symbols from everything, from Aleister Crowley, etc. And this is not new. Now, one of the problems is that, which I'll be doing more reports on. I'm going to have to go back and look at these different things. There was the McMartin preschool incident, which was investigated by, well, unfortunately, you have unlaw enforcement on a federal level. They looked into satanic crimes and they said it didn't exist, just like the mafia doesn't exist. Right, J. Edgar? There's no, you got pictures of me in a dress and I'm really gay in the 1950s. So, there's no organized crime. We're not going to go after you. We find out what happens when they go after organized crime, especially after you deal with them, like Bobby Kennedy did, who then went after the mafia, who got his brother elected. Well, they took him out. So the whole idea is that we need to understand the way these people operate, and you need to know somebody who's been involved with it. So the McMartin preschool, where all these children were molested, and of course, that's when we went through the satanic panic time, where you saw Michael Aquino, and I believe at that time it was Anton LaVey's daughter came out and talked about Satanism. And these are kind of the upper crust. Aquino, the colonel, one person under a general special forces officer who was stationed at the Presidio, has been linked to a whole bunch of stuff. We just don't know if any of it is true. I think he was smarter than that, but there's an awful lot of testimony from children who knew exactly, who testified against him that he brought them to his San Francisco private house and then molested them. Now, this is what the children have said. I don't know. That's what's been alleged. But if somebody points out your secret entrance, because he didn't go directly because he was afraid of people attacking him, well, that's pretty frightening evidence. If somebody knows, well, he didn't know. No, that's not the entrance. He goes over here, and that's where he did. Very interesting. So we don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. Aquino was a very strange, plotting, cunning guy who was 100% supported by the corrupt military establishment and had one of the highest clearances you could possibly get. And everybody knew, including the military. He didn't pull anything over on the military. The military knew that he was the head of the satanic church, and they put him in NORAD. So we just don't know. All of this stuff is pretty sketchy. Who has recently died, apparently, from colon cancer. We don't know what he was into. He's a fascinating figure, and I've followed him for many years. When I've heard about him, other people, Jeannie Scott wrote a book about him, who was involved with him in a sexual relationship, and talked about what was going on there. It's very hard to figure all this stuff out. But he was never prosecuted for anything. He was a rich guy. Mommy left him a huge amount of money from her real estate business in San Francisco. And he had a very nice life. And he was what the military wants, a test passer. He could go to any military school and he would pass the test with flying colors. This is what he did all his life. He did that as an Eagle Scout. It's amazing how many Satanists were Eagle Scouts. He did that in college, which he got a political science degree at UCSB, University of California at Santa Barbara, a few years before me, and very, very interesting. So, but it's not really a high course. This political science is what you take when you want to just get a degree. I've known a few people who've done that. It's one of the easiest degrees to get. So this isn't a genius boy, but he was able to write papers well. He went to military, which is the Army in particular, is known to be a bunch of stooges that are uneducated. So the military loved him because he could pass tests. Yeah, but look at all the military schools he passed. Who cares if he's a Satanist? That guy over there, he's a good guy, but he can't write his name. So the whole idea is very typical of the U.S. Army in particular, and particularly in the 70s when nobody wanted to go in the Army anyway, right, in Vietnam and just after. But the U.S. Army has always been known to be the stupidest people in the military, and they take anybody. So is he breathing? We'll drag him in. So this is all part of what goes on in the military and so forth. But to think that this guy, who's he didn't hide anything. And most of these people weren't hiding things. The satanic Nordic Temple of Set person, Edred Flowers, otherwise known as Edred Thorson, stated in his introduction he thanked Michael Aquino and so forth, and a bunch of other Satanistic pagan Norse people. Again, they take things that are there and pervert it for their own use. So we got to understand that. That goes on with all of this stuff. So it's very important that we do that. It's very important that we understand all of this. So we need to follow through with understanding. So if you don't understand Satanism, you don't understand how they do things, you're going to miss it. For somebody to see a giant white circle with a regular Christian cross surrounding a upside down satanic cross, and to think that that was done by the same people, is the height of disinformation. I mean, if you're reporting stuff like that, you are really messed up and have no idea what you're doing. So all these investigations are interesting, but I'm not sure we need to find out what happened in a 50-year-old case, and they're not searching for satanic groups in that particular area. What they're trying to do with the research there, which Manny is trying to do, is he's looking back into the old stuff, and he's not trying to connect anybody of today. So he's trying to play it safe. I understand it to a degree, but you're trying to milk something, make money from it, and get followers, but you're really not getting into what's happening today. So what is the satanic occult scene in his particular area, suburb of New York City, Queens, Yonkers, etc.? What are the groups operating in that area? They talk about Herman Slater, who's been dead for 30 years. All of this stuff, and that was the occult shop in New York City that was very famous, and he published several books, including the famous Necronomicon fraud book. That certainly is a fun occult book. But he published that. He published several other books, but he didn't publish any satanic books that I know of at all. Now, he only published maybe 10 books, and they all were witchcrafty books. He sold witchcraft supplies. Again, witchcraft is not Satanism. It's not even close. Now, whether they're doing strange acts or whether they're real sexual or whatever, well, that's not really satanic unless they're doing evil stuff. And, of course, there's evil Wiccans. There's evil witchcraft people. Well, you can take anything and pervert it. But that's not Satanism. That's using evil magic. Satanism is a very particular special area. So getting back to McMartin's preschool, which I'm going to do more videos on because I find this interesting. Well, this was all laughed at. They all talked about how these people were, and I think that school got off, and those people involved in it. Well, it's just this guy and his mother. They're just kind of these average people. Now, I don't remember his name, but I will post it in future information on this. I think this is kind of fascinating stuff. Past the basic, light a candle, do this stuff, which I think I've covered quite well and have lots of texts on. But the preschool thing is that they were molesting all these children, and they got away with it from what I can understand. The children talked about going down into this area where they had a tunnel or something, and they found that tunnel where they were doing things in, well, the dirt there was filled in. They found hundreds of turtle bones. Now, hundreds? Well, turtles live fairly long. I think we've all had them as kids. And why would you have hundreds of them? And why would you bury a turtle bone? Wouldn't you throw that out? So the whole idea is that why were there hundreds? And the court laughed at this. What are you talking about, turtle bones? Well, that's what they were killing. They were cutting heads off and other things. Well, that's right. Why would you have hundreds of those buried in a particular area? That is very strong evidence, and you may chuckle at that, but it's not a chuckling account. It's a real account. And there were many other instances of this particular preschool, and it always happens like this. Look for the fires, people. Look at 9/11, Building 7, which was maybe a half a mile away from the Trade Center buildings. It's all smoke and mirrors, people. Look at these two buildings. Well, they blew up Building 7, which was what it's all about, because that had all the records of all the criminals, all Enron, all the documents that everybody was all in that building, which just was completely blown up. And that was also the New York City's major operational center, which you'd think would be more secure. Yet that was blown up. And there's tapes and everything else showing it. It fell straight to the ground. It was demolitionized. Well, how do you do that? Happened the same day. So obviously somebody set up all this stuff. It's so straightforward it isn't even funny. Anybody that doesn't believe that 9/11 was a government planned situation is foolish. Even Michael Aquino said that was a CIA operation. Of course it was. And everybody else, including the Bushes who managed that building. So it goes on and on and on. Look for the fires. Now, what happened at the Presidio with Michael Aquino? Well, the record building, guess what? Burnt down. Oh, isn't that interesting? Well, this couple that ran McMartin's preschool had a cabin up in the mountains of Los Angeles. I'm not sure what that was. What a pine crowd. I'm not sure what the area was up there, but I've been up in those mountains several times. I know the area. I probably passed that house. But they had a house up there. Guess what? It caught on fire. So they burnt the house down, and this FBI agent that was researching it, who later apparently was poisoned, went up there and took pictures of it. And they had giant magical symbols, satanic symbols, but these were more magically based because there are symbols or sigils of Lucifer, etc. So the whole idea is that this was on the buildings. He has pictures of himself standing next to these giant symbols which were in this particular cabin, which they didn't destroy, and they didn't bother to go up there and do anything about it. They just burnt the building down. Well, they knew they were protected. So it's always protected because it's all part of the giant criminal satanic reality there. So all of this is something that we need to fully understand of what is going on. So this is critical that we need to understand the fact of what's going on, and that we need to notice these things. So he goes through all these investigations. He's kind of an interesting guy. He's an old style FBI agent from the 70s. He's a company man. He thinks J. Edgar Hoover was good. He claims that they discredited him because he was J. Edgar Hoover, when the bottom line is, is that J. Edgar Hoover was quite a bizarre transvestite. He was definitely had a homosexual partner, and apparently, probably, and you got to remember the time of this. You're talking about the 50s and 60s. Apparently, was half black on top of it. Now, these are horrible things to be in that particular time. So it's still people hide their homosexuality because of the prejudice against them, and there is strong prejudice. So the whole idea is that the mafia certainly knew this and had stacks of information against J. Edgar Hoover. To come out and state that there's no organized crime is like saying the sky is orange. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And he had information on everybody else, is the reason why he never got fired. And that's the problem with all these FBI, CIA agents. So the whole idea is this guy retired and went rogue, and he found out all this stuff about Satanism, has documented it. It is all over YouTube, and I will be posting stuff talking about his particular information there. But this whole McMartin preschool situation, which was many years ago, is quite more fascinating than the Son of Sam. Now, Son of Sam and David Berkowitz has already stated that there were other people involved. He has taken, I don't know if he's claiming 2 or 4 people that he shot. There are more people than that shot, and they were not shot by him. So the whole idea, other people shot him. This was a terror cult that was operating, which is kind of fascinating that this would happen and that they'd go out and start shooting people in the street. That's how radical they are. Now, this is starting to happen again. We have the incidents in the UK with this guy who was following satanic groups in general, and apparently specifically being involved with E.A. Konetti, and he murdered 2 women in a park brutally with knives. He stabbed people in a park. So the whole idea is that this is something that we have to fully understand of what's going on here. And there's other ones are. Apparently the Temple of Blood is another organization that is out there doing things, so it is claimed. But a lot of organizations out there that are being, E.A. Konetti stating that these organizations, there's a couple of them that were written about, were fantasy organizations that were brutal, trying to take over the world and raise a satanic flag by murdering a bunch of other people. The 9 angels, the angel of 9, whatever they are, groups, this is what he's stating. That these aren't real groups or not. But apparently there is, and there's these violent groups out there doing it. It's just this is not surprising of what's going on out there, and these people are supported. Koenig, while he was arrested a few years ago on drug and gun charges, he got a slap on the wrist. He was let out on probation, and I don't know how long it is. He's appearing on YouTube now, stoned out of his mind. And you think he would still be on probation, but apparently not, because that would be a violation of probation, and he should be going to jail. I mean, he's stoned all the time. Every time I see him, he's stoned, he's firing, taking on. Him and his other group, and they're all smoking dope and drinking alcohol, all the things that they actually do. Great representation of the satanic way. So the whole idea is we have all this, and he certainly got off. He's a 2-time loser and should have probably done some jail time for at least a year or so for possession of several different narcotics, hallucinogens, etc., and a fair amount of it, in a very anti-drug state such as Utah, but apparently nothing happened. So I don't know how much of a fine he paid or anything else, but he got a slap on the wrist. This was a disciplinary action against him anyway by people involved trying to keep him in line. So it is alleged. So the whole idea is that this is a unique area. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to understand the symbology. You have to understand how they work. It's highly unlikely and has been a general understanding. It certainly was in the 80s and 90s that if you're a Satanist, nobody would work with you. Certainly Wiccans, OTO, etc. would never get involved, and they had their own practices. There's also a great schism in Satanism many years ago, which apparently has been healed between the Temple of Vampires, the Church of Satan, and the Temple of Set. All of these people generally didn't get along with each other. Nobody liked the Temple of Set. The Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's old group, didn't like the Temple of Set because they broke away from the original church. The Temple of Vampire were their own people. They started working together in, I don't know, maybe around 2000, etc. And there's kind of a unity of these groups. Now, their practices are, it's hard to know their practices in terms of what they truly believe. But the bottom line is that, it's very individually based. So whatever the individual does, it's not necessarily what the organization states you do. But the whole idea is they leave a very open area. These people aren't looking for justice. They're not looking for retribution. They're looking to hurt and kill people for their own personal empowerment. And that means it's satanic and evil. And that's what you have to understand with these groups. And that's the difference between seeking justice and seeking attacking people. Now, in one of Knetting's books, he picked a poor high school girl and with his little group of Satanists, and they attacked her, trying to make her sick and ill. And they were so happy, for no reason whatsoever. They were so happy that she missed a few days of school because she wasn't feeling good, etc. Now, that's evil magic. They just picked her, victimized her because she was alone, and then enjoyed their purpose. This is called hoodlumism. This is what evil people do on every single instance. So this is the way it goes. So we need to understand the fact that this is the reality of the world out there, and we need to fight against this as a group. But if you're going to study this, you need to know what's going on here, and it's quite different. You can't look at Wicca and think that that's going to mean. So, Maury Cherry's books that he looked at were all magical books. They have absolutely nothing to do with Satanism. So you're looking in the wrong area. And Maury Cherry stated these satanic groups, even claiming that the rock group Rush was satanic. As far as I understand, from what I can see, and I'm not a follower of theirs, they are quoted in other areas as being fantasy-based. Well, fantasy-based is not Satanism. So I can't find any quick reference to them that they were involved in any kind of, quote, occult practices or anything else with them. So you have to look in a very specific manner. You got to know what these people are, and they're not part of regular paganism and, quote, regular occultism. They are part of a unique offshoot of this entire belief system, which is called Satanism. And they have their own ways of doing things. And they use certain books, but they're not taking a Gerald Gardner's Wiccan book and saying that this is what they do magically. It's nonsense. All of this is nonsense. And if you look that way, you're going to get a lot of wrong information. And you really have to be studied in this area to fully understand it. I don't really know. It probably is some books on Satanism out there. But if you go and read books by Satanists, I'm not sure if they lay out what their belief systems are and give you basic practices. Well, they may. I haven't really investigated Knetting's books on Satanism. He probably has rituals and other things there. But it's apples and oranges. And it's sad to see people are going in the wrong direction. So hopefully this has been very enlightening. More to come in the future.